Good evening, everyone. It's 6:32, Monday, January 8th. I'm Eric Sterling. I'm calling to order the January meeting of the Advisory Commission on Policing. I believe that we have a quorum. I identify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members of the commission. We don't have let's see, I guess we still don't have Dr. Gaster. I see Dr. Ekstrand and Ms. Daphnis, Mr. Ricks, Ms. Delane, Ms. Branson. So, and welcome our guests, Chief Frank, Captain Satinsky, Lieutenant Innocenti, Sergeant Brewer is present, Chief Augustine, well as our staff, Susan Farag and Logan Anbinder, and other guests. First order of business then would be the minutes of the December meeting. Have friends had an opportunity to review the minutes of the December meeting?
Move the minutes as submitted, subject to any corrections.
It has been moved. Is there a second to adopt the minutes of December? Ms. Branson seconds. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, very good. Everyone has voted, present has voted to adopt the minutes. Minutes adopted. Thank you. Our agenda this evening, we had asked in our last meeting, we wanted to we've been sort of inquiring for some time about, in our discussions regarding traffic enforcement, the question whether or not traffic enforcement and stops and citations might have an effect upon police officer evaluation, if there are incentives that creates. And Assistant Chief Frank is here to discuss that with us. We also had continuing questions regarding the IT and data management. And then we decided last month we were going to discuss Bill 4323 regarding crisis intervention teams. So let's begin then with the discussion of traffic enforcement. Chief Frank, we'll go till about 7, perhaps if you could if 10 minutes might be enough to make sort of an overview, and then we would be able to have an opportunity for any discussion or questions.
Sure. Good evening. And I could probably even make it quicker than that, because the short answer is no. Traffic enforcement doesn't have a significant impact on officers' ratings. But I can go through in detail kind of some of the expectations we have of our officers and how we go about I guess evaluating their performance. So first, and I believe this is let me introduce myself. I'm Darren Frank. I'm the Assistant Chief of the Management Services Bureau, and specifically the why I'm speaking to this issue. First, I have 28 years of experience. Second, the ratings system falls under me as part of personnel, human resources. And then additionally, data collection falls to me in our information management technology division. So in our ratings for patrol officers, there's many things that are covered. Traffic enforcement is one of them. Community policing is another. Report writing is another. Operation of technology is another section. Follow-up investigations can be another section. And all of these items in a rating go together to give a picture of what an officer does in their duties over the course of a year. The only time, I guess I'll start here. The only time that it has there's two ways that it has a significant effect. Any of the rating, not just traffic enforcement, but the rating number one, if the officer literally gets in their car and does nothing, or even does less than nothing, has terrible performance, like repeated policy violations, then there's a chance that their performance rating could be below expectations, and they could be put on a work improvement plan. And that the worst case scenario that would happen would that an increment that they're due every year by contract up until you're 15, they're due an increment. So you could potentially hold up that increment if they show an overall rating of below expectations, not just one section. The entire overall rating is below expectations. I can tell you all of those items come to my attention because I also oversee legal and labor along with our personnel division. And I have none of those in the last 3 years that I've been assistant chief. I have none of those on my radar for a patrol officer. So it's very rare that we have problems like that. Now, where the rating does take effect a lot is in our determination for position vacancies. So I'll give you an example. When I was a young officer, I wanted to be a district investigator, and many people wanted to be an investigator. But what we look for, what the sergeant, the supervisor, or the lieutenant will look for when they're filling a vacancy for, say, a district investigative position, they'll look and see a number of things. They'll look at my application, but they'll also look at my rating to see, did I do follow-up investigations? Did I do any temps that are documented in the rating? And then we'll go to the interview. So all those things coming together. And when you're making a selection for these specialized positions, generally, you wouldn't, for a district investigator position, you wouldn't take an officer that's never done a follow-up investigation, that's never done a temporary assignment investigative unit. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's very rare because these are usually, our officers have the freedom to pick a career track, if you would, and go and ask for things like apply to Chief Augustine's Investigative Services Bureau to say, hey, I want to do a temporary assignment. So you look for that sign of motivation in their rating to fill a position. Now, in regards to traffic, the same thing goes. If I'm filling a central traffic position where their primary duty is to do traffic enforcement, I'm going to look for an officer that has documented on there that they've done a number of traffic stops. And when I say number, not just a number, just looking to show that in the rating, this officer has an interest in doing traffic safety related details. There are other things to go with that as well. I mentioned traffic safety. If the officer under the POP project or community-oriented policing section of the rating has demonstrated that they went out and did a traffic detail that they originated within their beat because they recognized an area was prone to accidents, or they got data from our traffic division that there was accidents there, and they wanted to come up with the community policing, then that's something else I would look for as well in filling a traffic officer vacancy. So that's really where we look for them. And also, I'll go back to the performance thing. There are things that we look for. I'll give you an example. I was a midnight officer. I was also a midnight sergeant. The thing that we know happens after dark and generally after 10 o'clock when our midnight officers go into service is there are people on the roads drinking and driving, unfortunately. So if I have a midnight officer that has done one traffic stop through the course of a year or one DUI related stop through the course of the year, me as a supervisor, I'm going to have a conversation with them that, hey, we need to do a little bit more because the public depends upon us to make sure that the roads are safe. And that's part of the expectation of being a midnight officer, because that's what you deal with. It's one of the differences between a day work officer, an evening officer, and a midnight officer, and the performance expectations. So for a day work officer, not having any DUIs or any DUI enforcement or just one or two, that's commonplace. It's not the same for midnights. So there aren't, and going back to where I started with, the simple answer is no. There's no quotas. There's no, hey, you got to go out and you have to do X. We can't do that. Quotas are illegal. What we can do is we can encourage people and try and lead them to do more in traffic enforcement, because as I'm sure everyone here has seen, our traffic fatalities continue to rise. They have been up post-pandemic, and it continues to be a challenge on our roadways. And what we are seeing after the pandemic, which of course decreased the volume on our roadways tremendously. A couple things have happened since. First, with COVID, the amount of traffic on our roadways just decreased tremendously because no one was going to work. They were working from home. What we've seen that has occurred following COVID is we still see a number of people teleworking, and we're waiting to see, believe it or not, we're waiting to see the volume of people on the road come back to what it was pre-pandemic. What we are seeing is that volume is coming back and the accidents are coming back as well. So that continues to rise every year. And unfortunately, the fatals, because there's so few, when you look at our fatals, a lot of them have to do with speed, and that speed that they're able to gain is attributable to less people on the roadways and the ability to drive in a reckless manner rather than being stopped in traffic. So I think I'll stop there. I think I've rambled for about 10 minutes and answer any questions that might have popped into people's heads.
Perfect, Chief. That was a good overview. I'm going to recognize commissioners who seek recognition. I see Ms. Delane's hand is up. That was from the vote, or go? Are you ready, Ms. Delane?
That was from the vote, yes, earlier.
Are there Ms. Branson?
Yeah, thank you. So I think, so it sounds to me like what you've said is that the part of the performance evaluation does include traffic stops as a factor. And that the performance evaluation does proceed on a basis that, most of us are familiar with: meets, exceeds, or fails to meet expectations, right?
Right.
And so a lot of that, having supervised people, I do understand that, sometimes it is a judgment call. It has to do with the complexity of the assignment and, the external forces that may, keep someone from meeting deadlines, all that kind of stuff in an office setting. All that has to be taken into account. And so a lot of stuff can factor in, right? but there are some things that are really quantitative. And so for those qualitative things, there are external factors, and you have to use judgment. But as I said, there are some things that are in fact quantitative, and it sounds to me that the traffic citation issue is capable of being quantitative. And so when you're looking at, I mean, there's a huge difference between, somebody who, has not written 2 tickets in a year versus somebody who has written, 700, I mean, there's, but somewhere there's a midpoint, somewhere there is an understanding of what the expectation is, in fact. Because if somebody's meeting it or exceeding it, there has to first be an expectation. And so when it comes to traffic stops, what you're saying is that there's no numerical expectation. Is that accurate?
Correct.
And so how is the expectation formed?
The expectation is formed around competency in doing it. So if I have and also a job assignment, as I go back to a midnight officer and DUI enforcement, which is a form of traffic stop, we have an expectation that because of the conditions on the roadway, that you do more DUI enforcement than other officers would do. And me as a leader, is if I notice that I have someone that hasn't done anything, I'm going to try and find a way to lead them to serve the community in the manner that is expected, and talk to them about how important DUI enforcement is, and any number of things. But the main thing that we look at is competency, not numbers. And have you completed traffic stops? Have you completed them without complaint? Have you filled out the paperwork properly? Have you focused on areas that we've asked you to focus on that are based on data-driven information about where we have accidents? The other aspect of the shift, and how you talk about the expectations. One of the things to understand about how police shift works and the people on a police shift is we have many different types of officers, not types of officers. We have many different officers that have different expertise and have different desires about what they want to do. For example, when I was an officer, I liked investigations. I did okay at traffic. I did stuff to keep myself busy, and I was a midnight officer, and the expectation was I need to make traffic stops related to DUI enforcement. I was also an intoximeter operator. So that actually, and that's a perfect example when you talk about that, because when I became an intoximeter operator, the expectation wasn't so great that I was doing traffic stops, but I was performing my duties as an intoximeter operator in a proficient manner so that I was doing my part for roadway safety. But going back to the example of, I'll use an evening shift or a day work shift. There are officers that, for whatever reason, something has touched them in their life, whether it be a tragedy from a traffic offense, a friend that's been hurt, or just a general desire, that they like doing traffic stops. So they'll do a lot of traffic stops, and they don't want anything to do with a follow-up investigation. And so you as a sergeant, when you look at that, you take into account what your shift is doing. You take into account the totality of your shift and what they're doing to contribute to the mission of the department. Yeah, I've got Darren over here that is doing investigations. I've got Jordan over here that's doing traffic stops, or Jordan's probably more appropriate for doing crisis intervention work. And then you have Nick Augustine, who's doing traffic stops. So we all come together to serve in our sector, in our beat, in a manner. And as I'm judging an officer in that rating, I guess you could call it a judgment, I'm looking at the total competency and the addition to the mission and doing what we expect. So it's not, there's no midpoint on the you were talking about ranges. I'm guessing you were talking about, there's no ranges in there as far as, you know, he or she did more than 20 but did less than 100, so therefore you're X. That's not in any of the that's just not part of the formula for as we look at ratings.
Thank you. Vice Chair McKinney.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening, Chief Frank. Thank you for being here first and foremost.
Thank you, sir.
I was just curious, since this is not a quantitative thing, when and at what point would you discover whether or not you felt that a given officer was pulling their weight, if you will, were based on what you have seen as a history of what goes on? I think you used one example as, overnight, it is, critical to traffic enforcement, and that thing is critical to your mission. So at what point would you discover if someone is, say, policing in a way that is consistent with what you have previously seen with officers that you feel like are handling their responsibilities appropriately? I may have missed you talking about that because I came in just a minute or so after you began speaking.
Sure. So we have to track everything, as you all know. There's many things we track. Now, back in the day, for me, it was a book with a tick mark on it. Today we have automated systems, and I can go in and look at my officers. I can look at the reports they wrote and I have to approve the reports in e-justice. I can go into e-ticks and see what they've done in a set amount of time for performance wise. So as a supervisor, at a minimum, I'm looking at a monthly basis at, well, first of all, I'm leading by being out there with my folks. So I have a sense of what people do and don't do. I'm listening to the radio. Then if for some reason I'm asleep at the wheel at the end of the month, I should be checking things, because a rating goes through the entire year. It's not fair to anyone. Let's say you have an officer that's doing absolutely nothing. They do absolutely nothing for 9 months. And then in the 10th month, I come tell them I'm going to hold you below performance because you haven't done projects, you haven't responded to any calls, you haven't written any reports, you haven't done any traffic stops. So I'm not sure I'm going to hold you below requirements because you have not shown any capability to do any of this work, when I know your shift mates have been pulling their weight and doing the work, and I've been observing them doing it. Like, you don't ever want to get in that situation. So at a very least, on a monthly basis, I'm looking at what my folks are doing through the various databases, just to make sure there's no red flags about anything. And the red flags can go both ways. The other part of it too is you're working with your station command, and your station command is looking at overall things. They're looking at increases in traffic accidents. They're looking at complaints from citizens. They're looking at crime trends from the crime analyst. And so they're talking to the shift sergeants and saying, hey, we're having a problem here I used to be a patrol officer in Wheaton. So, and I used to be a patrol sergeant there too. So we're having a problem in the King sector on George Avenue. What's going on? There's a speeding problem. There's a pedestrian problem. We've had 2 pedestrian fatalities. What are we doing to fix the problem? And then I'm looking at, what are my folks doing to affect the community so that we reduce the chance, reduce the opportunity for those fatalities. So it's an ongoing process that you're going through, and that you're looking at these things. And then as you see something, and again, as you see something that's not and your shift isn't addressing the total mission, then you get into the leadership part of sitting someone down, figuring out what's going on. You haven't done X. Tell me what's going on with this. Do you need some training? Do you need some retraining? Are you uncomfortable with something? There's a whole myriad of reasons about why an officer might not be performing in a certain manner. And then you go down that and try and find the root cause and fix that.
Thank you. Dr. Gaster and then Mr. Ricks.
Yes, thank you, Assistant Chief Frank. This is very helpful. And it seems to me that you face the sort of classic problems of remote workers, basically. You're managing remote workers out on the street, and you have to find different ways to figure out what they're up to and to stay close enough to them to do this. And you make a good case that you're doing that. I guess I had a slightly different sort of question. It's only tangential. Well, it is on this topic, really. As I understand the data, it seems to me that since the traffic division reorganization and the shift of responsibilities a couple of years ago, along with COVID, there has been an enormous decline in the number of tickets issued and no corresponding increase in accidents. I think it seems that there's been a pretty substantial change in how the department sees its traffic responsibilities. And as you probably know, I'm all in favor of this. I think it's a tremendous step forward. And I wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Well, I think we can't limit our look at causality. So also in with COVID, which reduced traffic on the road. Also in with teleworking there's also the effect that George Floyd and his murder had on the entire policing profession. And what you are seeing in many jurisdictions, well, there's the impacts seen across many of the jurisdictions are pretty similar, to include hiring impacts, to also include traffic impacts, because we've had a number of efforts at the county level, specifically Montgomery County. We've had a number of efforts where we have been told, or officers have been told, and not by the leadership. Certainly we talk about respecting people, we talk about profiling, we talk about all of the things that we've always talked about. But there are messages that our officers are hearing that says, your public thinks you are bad and doesn't want you pulling them over. And I think that, separate of COVID or anything else, there has been a message to our officers, true or untrue, but a very loud message, that your traffic enforcement isn't appreciated. And it's interesting because when you go to community meetings, I will tell you, if you ask some of our commanders, I don't know if any of them are on this evening, out of the top 3 complaints, it's 2 of them are generally, and I can say this from when I was a commander, are speeding and loud mufflers. So it's an interesting dynamic in the public. What our officers know is they don't want to be judged as bad people. That's not what they signed up for. So that's another effect that plays into this whole dynamic as you look at these numbers as they go. Now, when you look at them, we're up fatality wise since 2019, we're up 6%. That's unacceptable to us. And again, when you look at what those fatalities are related to, they're related to driving behaviors that are very detrimental to the person driving, and also detrimental to anyone in the car with them, or detrimental to people in other cars. That's unacceptable to us as a county. We've said we want Vision Zero. When you look at the studies behind impacting driver behavior, it's clear that interaction with drivers, whether it be the touch of just getting pulled over or the touch of a speed camera, both of which we have evidence have been effective at changing driver behavior, that's what will cause these fatalities to come down. That's what will
I,
cause
I
people
think
to
you
change.
misunderstood my point.
Okay.
That traffic tickets fell
Mhm.
by about 70% in
Yeah.
the course of COVID.
Mhm.
And I would say that if traffic, uh, what that demonstrated to me anyway, is that partly because you're now clearly doing traffic enforcement in a pretty sophisticated way, rather than I think what one might call a more beat officer kind of way, which it was before. We've had a 70% decline in traffic stops.
Okay.
They've gone up a little bit since then, but not much. And essentially your fatalities and your accidents are flat. So what you found is that you've managed to maintain control of the roadways pretty effectively after a very, very substantial decline in traffic stops. And I think that's to your credit.
No, I appreciate that, but I guess I would caution you that the jury's still out on that. As I said, our numbers are coming up. Right now, I'll tell you right now, in 2019, pre-COVID, pre all of this, we had 3,982 injury-related collisions. Now that dropped down to 2,600. Then it started rising again. 2021's 2,900. 2022's 3,100. 2023 is 3,300. Our fatalities, again, 6% increase from
But
2019.
we don't really know how much traffic there is on the roads, right?
Well, yeah, I don't
mean,
I don't think there's
traffic,
I don't think there's
the
an overall measurement. No.
Increase in accidents from the depths of COVID upwards is pretty unsurprising. I mean, there's been a lot of recovery of traffic movement
Sure.
as
Right.
well. So it's not, I guess all I'm saying is that I think you've managed to find ways to be very effective in terms of safety. At the same time, that the number of actual stops has declined tremendously. I'm not saying for a second that there aren't plenty of stops that you should make. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
I'm not.
evidence strongly suggests that there was an awful lot of stops made in the past that
Yes.
didn't necessarily impact accident numbers. And that you've managed to find a way. I congratulate you.
Dr. Gester, thank you. And
I'll take that win.
Good.
And but again, our question fundamentally was the question of whether or not evaluation of officers, whether it perceived or explicit regarding traffic stops, would have an influence in the number of traffic stops. But I recognize these other questions are very important, and Chief Frank, we're glad that you're speaking on that. I'd like to recognize Mr. Ricks, whose hand was up for his question.
I can pass. I think there's been enough discussion in the area that I was going to speak to.
Okay, Mr. Ricks. Dr. Ekstrand.
I would just like to suggest that it would be a good idea, and maybe you do some of this and I just don't know about it, to do additional analysis of traffic stops. You know, Dr. Gaster is pointing out that there seems to be a somewhat inverse relationship between traffic stops and accident rates. But I wonder if more insight could be gained by assessing the types of traffic stops. You know, if are they for a headlight out or a tail light out, or are they for something perhaps much more serious like speeding or reckless driving or potential DUI, etc. You know, I think that would be very informative to deciding whether increase or decrease of traffic stops is something that should be considered in relationship to the accidents.
So, doctor, and I think both doctors bring up great points that need to be looked at. So to your first question, we would welcome that. In fact, we're going through the budget process right now, and we have a request in there. We hope that it's fulfilled. And I will say I have spoken about this in front of council before and other meetings about the need to properly analyze what we're doing. And unfortunately, to do that, generally to go to the academics and have them do a look at things, it costs a lot of money. Pretty much every time you want a university to look at something, it's about $100,000.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what we would like to do, and we think Montgomery County should be a leader in this, is to be able to evaluate data like our academic partners look at it, except we don't have to pay the academic price. So we want to get more into that business so we can evaluate impact better and focus our efforts, because I will say hiring comes under me, and changing course on this ship that is our attrition problem has been a great challenge. And my fear is, as we move forward, we're going to have to continue to figure out how to do more with less. And the only way you do that is by thoroughly analyzing data, which we already do. I will say, we've got information on what our traffic unit, our centralized traffic unit, has done in high intensity traffic areas where we have a number of collisions. But we need to do more of that activity to help guide us in our efforts. So we welcome that. It's just finding the ability to do it. And I will come back to Dr. Gaster real quick. I saw your note in there. I will say, again, going to the overall point, which was brought up, is how do traffic stops bear into officers' ratings? Well, I will tell you, we have the proof since COVID and George Floyd and whatever you want to say it is, that our patrol officers have drastically reduced their traffic stops, and none of them are being yelled at or their increments being held up or anything like that, because we are, as a leadership, we are listening. We're listening to a bunch of different groups, and almost to Dr. Gaster's point, we're trying, and my point about the jury's still out. This is a very short time frame to do any sort of analysis on. So we are in the business of finding the sweet spot of meeting our mission of safety, and also listening to the public and treating people in a way that is fair and respectful. And so finding that sweet spot, we're still in the middle of, and I think time will tell. But certainly, to the first point of, do these impact officers' ratings, we're not yelling at anyone about their traffic stop information. We're not holding increments up. It's not really playing a factor in them going out and doing more traffic stops.
Chief Frank, thank you very much. And we appreciate your careful response to our questions regarding this. I think that I think that all of us want the police department to succeed in keeping our roads safe. And that we want our officers to feel that they're empowered to take the steps necessary to do that, and that they're supported by bodies like ours, as well as the general public. And that the challenge is is the question of, to what extent then are do members of the public feel that there's a difference between they're being stopped for an equipment problem versus a safety problem? And I think that it goes obviously to the judgment of officers and the circumstances. Like I think everybody here who's a driver, it is not uncommon that we see vehicles driving down the road next to us after dark with no lights on. Now that, is that because they're intoxicated, or is that because they forgot, they're not aware that their lights are not on, or that the bulbs have burned out and they're not aware of that, and it's a more innocent mistake. But and so I think those of us who are drivers are alarmed when we see a vehicle that doesn't have its lights on after dark. I think all of us have experienced people who are driving recklessly on our, and are alarmed by this. And of course, we count on the police. And and I think many of us probably say, "Gee, I wish there was a police officer here now to witness this." And so translating the nation's disgust about how George Floyd was murdered, his versus how we can support our police officers, so that we have enough police, and that the police officers and their management feel that they are adequately funded and adequately equipped. I mean, that's kind of this tension that we're all now struggling to live in, and we're also, of course, aware that there have been historic concerns in the county, and that the county is constantly changing, and so that complicates these kinds of perceptions. I see Ms. Branson for sort of a last comment on this, and then we'll move on to our next item. But thank you for explaining some of the challenges that exist here, Ms. Branson.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go all rosy scenario. I mean, I really think we have made quite a good deal of progress. Like I think everybody agrees that reckless drunk drivers need to be off the road. I don't think there's any disagreement on that. And I really am heartened to hear that the department is looking at ways to it sounds like target enforcement in a way that targets safety concerns. And what is necessary to get there is additional data and maybe a different kind of analytical framework. If that's really where we are, then I'm willing to say that is a great deal of progress. And so speaking for myself anyway, I think the commission has made several observations regarding the police department's collection of data and how that data is not necessarily doesn't seem to match with what the questions that they should be asking. I mean, we've mentioned that in several different ways. And so, I think it would be lovely for us to know and understand how your request to the council, budgetary, talks about that data issue and funding, because you know what, we might really want to support that. And so that would be a really good place to sort of resolve this discussion. I would hope that you could share that with us.
Yep, I will certainly share the progress. I'm very hopeful for it. It's still at the county executive level, and I know the county executive has been very supportive of what we have been talking about and what we've had as a vision of looking at data and fine tuning what we do. As I said, finding that sweet spot. So I will keep you appraised. We will keep you appraised, and my strong thought is that this will make it over to the county council, and we can perhaps have support for that effort.
Thank you. Vice Chair McKinney.
One thing, Mr. Chairman, is that I wanted to let everybody know and give them my apologies that I have to leave because I have to attend another meeting. And so I apologize to Chief Frank, to my colleagues, and also to Ms. LaDana that I'm not going to get to hear her presentation. Additionally, I'd like to ask, and I don't know if this is in order or not, you can advise me if I can, I would like to make a personal comment to the chief and his staff.
Given this is probably our last meeting, I would say that that's perfectly appropriate.
Okay, well, Chief Frank, it was regarding a recent traffic incident or stop that I was involved in, and an investigation was conducted by your department. And with my 43 plus years of having been in law enforcement and conducting investigations myself, your department did a wonderful job. So I just wanted to thank you, thank the chief, and thank the members of your department that did that work. It was excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. And I guess I'll close my loop on what we've been talking about, which I think goes to a core a lot of stuff we're doing. We're trying to be the most professional we can be, and we're also trying to show the greatest respect possible. When you look at all these events that have led to a lot of this reimagining, which is definitely needed, it had to do with a lack of respect. And so we have been focusing on that a great deal. Thank you. I will let Chief Jones know, and I am very, very happy that you would have an experience with us, and I hope everyone was okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Ty, thanks very much for that comment, and we're going to miss you. Thank you for your participation this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chief Frank, thank you. And I'd like to move on now to our discussions about IT and data management. Is Ms. LaDana with us, or will that be handled?
That will be me. So I'm Director LaDonna's boss, and she is actually stuck in an airport, I believe. I can't remember if she's in Australia right now or if she's made it to Europe.
We got the picture.
She texted, she sends her apologies. She actually texted early this morning and said she's delayed by 24 hours and extends her apologies. But Kathy and I work hand in hand on the data aspects, and I believe I've seen the questions, and I have a pretty good robust knowledge of what we're doing.
Excellent. Well, you're let's say 10 minutes again. Would that sort of be sufficient for an overview?
Sure.
Thank you very much, Chief.
What am I overviewing? Hold on, I got to pull up my next set of questions.
Okay.
Hold on one second. There we go. All right. Adequate data management. Okay. So, all right. So I guess I'll address a couple things. Number one, we are in the middle of a technology transformation within our department. We have a number of systems that are, quite frankly, old, and we are being asked questions today that we weren't being asked 10 and 15 years ago when these systems came online. For example, I was part of the procurement of our current records management system. That records management system was procured back when I became a lieutenant 15 years ago. And it's been the same system ever since. And we actually went along quite well for a long time. We thought we were answering questions. We also captured data on spreadsheets, and I was the director of major crime, so anything you wanted to ask me about carjackings, commercial robberies, homicides, suicides, I had a spreadsheet. But what we have seen in the last 3 years is an explosion of interest in our numbers and our data, and the realization that our systems are just not capable of pulling all the questions that come up. And to the credit of everyone that we deal with, people find new ways to ask things that, quite honestly, even with me and 3 people in a room trying to figure out what is everyone going to ask, someone figures out another way to ask something that's relevant. And so we're in this process right now. Director LaDonna is fantastic. She gets the vision that we want, which is there's a couple keys to it. Number one, to start collecting the data that people are interested in a efficient way, in an intuitive way, because I'm sure everyone here has heard that crap data in is crap analysis out, or however you want to put it. And so the way you get good data is you make it intuitive, efficient to enter data for the officer that's involved or our professional staff's involved. And then you go about the analyzing it once you get the data. So our systems, we're currently in the process of procuring an RMS system. That RMS system is going to be built out. We want to build it off the shelf product because our experience says we have better luck that way. Systems don't crash. We also can't afford what IBM wants to charge to come in and write a system. Shoot, Southwest can't even get their information straight, and they're making billions of dollars. So we actually we have an opportunity there with a vendor that's got a good amount of experience that can tie our stuff together. The other thing we want to do is consolidate platforms. We have one-offs left and right that are collecting different datas, and we want a product that is going to collect that data not in a spreadsheet but in a database, and that again, going back to the first 2 things, efficiently collect it, intuitively collect it. So we're in that process. We're also procuring a couple other systems. And interestingly enough, we're also creating our own stuff, to be honest, because what we have found is even the tried and true programs aren't doing what we want them to do because no one's pressing them to do what the citizens of Montgomery County expect out of us. For example, we have a program, IA Pro, that is a records management system of sorts for internal affairs investigation, and it just doesn't do all the things that we want it to do. So we have a guy in-house shares the same first name as me that is programming things for us and making connections to different things that we want, is able to write script for things so that we can start collecting data in a better manner. So we're in this process. We've been in it. Again, I think I oversold. I'm almost to 3 years as assistant chief in the Management Services Bureau, and we continue to work on these projects. It's just, honestly, it was neglected for the longest time. Money was put towards other things, and we just thought we were doing okay. And so now the money is being put to these efforts. And I'm very happy about that because at the end of the day, when you talk about efficiency, it's going to help us a great deal. Another thing that's going to help us with this attrition problem. So we're working through those issues. I will say, going back to one other point, speaking about the gentleman that's writing things, he's also connecting things internally. When, let's say you all have a question, we don't just have databases that just have an answer to X question. A lot of the times we have to go to this guy, Darren, and say, Darren, we know there's data over here. We know there's some data over here. Can you figure out a way to program and collect the data from there and there and put it together so we can report out on it? Which we're not obligated to do if you look at MPIA laws and so forth, but we're not going to get into that argument. We're going to do our best to try and figure out how to get you the data. So when a lot of the times when I get a request, because I get the request because it falls under my bureau, I go to Kathy and Kathy goes to Darren, how can we write this so we can get this data? The last thing is we're also in the middle of rewriting a number of our policies to modernize them because they haven't been looked at in a while. They have best practices, but one of the things that we're finding is the data aspect of it, collecting, again, answering questions that people are asking, that really wasn't built in because we hadn't thought in that manner before. So as we're going through and making sure that all of our policies are up to date, we're also adding in how to collect data, how to do other things. I'll give you a great example, and I believe this group's talked about consent searches. We rewrote the consent search policy. We rewrote the form. We were feeling pretty darn good about the data we were collecting off of that, and that went into effect in February of 23. We were feeling pretty darn good about what we were doing, collecting data and so forth, and our process, right? A form's going to be filled out for every consent search. Well, we found out we weren't collecting a piece of data, and it had to do with outcomes. And specifically, was anything found during the search? And right, you say it out loud right now. Well, that makes sense. Why wouldn't you collect that data? Well, when you had 30 big brains reviewing the doggone policy, no one caught on to that on the form that was attached. I think we just all thought it was being done. So we're going to go through another revision of our consent search form and put a box on there to collect data on outcomes, because it's helpful to know outcomes. It's one thing to know what we did, but we also want to know outcomes. Was something found? Was something not found? And it becomes relevant data, not to the actions of the officer, but to start analyzing, hopefully if I get my data scientist to start analyzing, okay, what's the meaning behind this? What is the meaning behind the data that we've collected on this?
Well, very good. Chief, thank you for that overview. I see Dr. Gaster's hand. I'm sure.
So
Ben will have
I
a
think
question.
thank you for that last point in particular. I totally understand. Iteration is the name of the data game. You make mistakes constantly, and you just have to be aware that that's going to happen and that you're going to have to make changes. So I congratulate you for catching it fairly quickly. So that's not too bad. So I have two sort of philosophical points for you when you're thinking about this stuff, and one very practical point. So the two philosophical points. First is exactly what you just said about outcomes, but writ large. It's really, I can't stress enough how important it is for the police department to find the outcome that it wants, not just the output. So I'll give you an example. When we first came onto this commission, we talked about how you measure effectiveness and how the police department is measuring what it does. And arrests figured as a big endpoint. But it's not really an endpoint.
No.
Arrests are not an endpoint. The endpoint is what happens after the arrest. And as far as I understand it, and maybe that's no longer true, but as far as I understand it, the reach of police data doesn't go beyond the arrest. You don't know what happened. I mean, you can find out on an individual case, of course, but you don't have a data connection to the state's attorney general to find out what's going on in their you know, in the court or diverted from the court or whatever. You don't have a, that it seems to me, that kind of outcome is really important to extend it out. Because what you want is a safer community. It's not more arrests. It's a safe community, ideally, where you never arrest anybody.
Yep.
And you're still a brilliant police department. So,
Right.
so that's sort of one philosophical point. The other one is a harder one. I think corporations and government agencies have figured out now that information and data are great, but they don't mean anything unless they have context. And the context comes from comparing yourselves to other police departments, not just in this area, but around the country, who are your real peers. There are police departments outside Philadelphia and outside Chicago who have kind of similar demographics, similar size. They would be good peers. I don't have a list, but I would really, really recommend that you go beyond Fairfax County and Prince George's County. They're not good peers necessarily, and they're not enough peers, definitely. So that understanding how they do things will tell you, hey, we're doing great, or we're not. We need to improve. Let's see what they're doing. So I would want, you know, as a parting gift, I'm leaving the commission, I would ask that you bake that thought into as many places as you can. I mean, look, your traffic numbers came down from 110 to 30,000 stops, more or less. Is that a lot? I don't know. There's no comparative data from your peer departments that would tell us, hey, you've done this brilliant job of moving your resources in a way that you're no longer wasting resources, you're doing better things with them. So those are the two things that I would say. Peer comparison is really, really important. Outcomes are really, really important. And the last thing is make the changes where you can make them quickly. You know, we were told that the form used to collect traffic data doesn't have a place, a specific place to say this is the primary cause of a stop. It just assumes, the state system just assumes that the first offense recorded is the primary record, if I understood that correctly. And if that's the case, well, you can just tell your officers, record the primary stop in the first place. That's it. You don't have to do anything else. You've got your data. It's better already. So that's, I've talked a lot. That's enough.
No. So to that little, to that little example, reference the primary stop. So that is what the training is from the state, that the initial reason for the stop will be the first citation. And it now in the state wording, in the training, it should be.
Yeah.
But I will say that Chief Jones is looking at changing our policy, putting in writing, not changing our policy, because we expect officers to follow their training. But Chief Jones is in the midst of, right now, I talked about rewriting our policies, specifically reference traffic enforcement. He's looking at, very strongly looking at changing the wording or adding wording that officers will record the initial reason for the stop as the first offense, if you would. So yeah, he is looking to do that, and I would say 100%. But until you see it in writing, you don't until you see it in writing, it ain't true yet.
Right.
But we actually just had a conversation about this past week, because that's a simple change. And it's consistent with training, except it's those words, right? In the training, it's should. It's not will, it's not would. So we're going to probably change it to a will, or a shall. The lawyers, do we have lawyers? The wills and the shalls, they help guide us. We have our county attorneys help us out.
Must is a good word.
Yes, must. Well, I'm going to let my lawyer friends figure out the best word to throw in there, but Chief Jones is interested in doing that. But just one point to your peer review. So there is value in that, right? And we're part of Major Cities Chiefs. We're one of the 80 largest agencies in the nation. So finding a peer can be difficult, and especially, and I've visited some of these agencies, finding them with the demographics might be similar, but the terrain, there's a number of things. I think there is value in it, but I think for us, what we look at is, are we moving the needle on the thing for which the public is telling us is a problem and they want us to fix? Are we moving the needle on fatal accidents? Are we moving the needle on theft from autos, on robberies, on whatever it is? And we continue to reassess, how can we move that needle? Now, there's a whole bunch of other things that go into the whole. I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of limiting factors to finding a peer. It's not to say that you can't do it, but I'll give you one example. The rules for engaging juveniles or charging juveniles in the state of Maryland, the laws here are very different than from many, many, many other states. And just that factor alone, what we're seeing in the state of Maryland, we just talked about a case today about gun store burglaries and adults using juveniles. And that's the theme that we've seen since the law change in the state of Maryland. You have some things that are happening because there's such unique things within a state. It makes it difficult, but there is value in it. I will say that. So I appreciate that perspective.
I would just add that trends are your friend, right? The
Downward trends.
situation may be different in a different environment, but the trend will help you to normalize. So,
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Gaster. Thank you, Chief Frank. Dr. Ekstrand.
Thank you. I would just like to add to this discussion about peers. And, I definitely agree with you that, finding something that looks like a perfect match to Montgomery County to make the comparison with is a waste of time, probably, because it would be so hard to do. But you can be a peer in relation to certain subsets of what you're doing. So in the example you gave of our juvenile rules being different than a lot of other locations, you can make a peer out of those other jurisdictions that have similar rules to the ones in Montgomery County.
Yes.
In the same way, I mean, I think that your point about terrain is, can be a factor, especially in things like traffic accidents and all those kinds of things. So, finding peers that have similar situations of, a suburban area with similar roadway situations, etc. I realize that doing this across the board would take your lifetime and mine too, to actually peer up on all these things. So I definitely don't recommend that. But for some things, when it is significant, then looking for a peer that's a match for that particular situation seems like a good strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will say, reference community policing, finding peers is actually a really good thing. And we do look a lot for that, because the problems are not unique. Gun store burglaries, car meetups, terrorizing downtown Silver Spring. That's not anything new. And they're seeing that across the country. And what we look at is jurisdictions, to your exact point, jurisdictions that have somewhat similar laws, or have gone out and took a action to deal with this community problem, and we're able to move the needle. And being able to figure out if we can take how they did that and adapt it to our circumstances, if they need adapted at all. Some of the changes are just darn simple, and we're like, oh, we should have thought of that, and let's go do it. But certainly not. And I wanted to bring up this point. My gosh, it was probably 30 minutes ago. Is you can't arrest your way out of any problem.
No,
It's just
I
not
agree.
it really, and I love the idea of our officers riding around just waving to people all day. That'd be fantastic. I want to live there. And trust me, we want to get there. That's if we can get there, that'd just be just splendid. So we keep trying, and that's where we do use the peer thing, looking at what our peers are doing just in general in law
Okay.
enforcement to affect these critical
Mhm.
issues, and seeing if we can put that into effect here.
Mhm.
Thank you, Chief Frank. Any other members have any further questions or comments for Chief Frank or his colleagues? I don't see any other hands. Chief, thank you and your team for joining us this evening. We have it's been very helpful for us.
Good.
We hope that you take away our support for the changes that you're proposing. We're enthusiastically supporting the improvements in the record management system and the data analysis that you want to achieve. And if there are ways that we can contribute to that effort, we would like to do so.
That would be great. My hair might come back if that happens. A full head of hair 2 years ago. No, just kidding. It's been a challenge, and we appreciate the support. And look, this is, I appreciate everyone's observations, and that's how we should be. We should be able to have just good conversations and figure out paths forward. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, very good. Thank you. Our next item is discussing or taking a position on the bill 4323 regarding crisis intervention team. Mr. Ricks,
Why? I'm just trying to.
somebody needs to mute themselves because we're hearing phone
Oh,
calls.
yeah.
I think your
Yeah,
phone,
yeah. Okay.
Mr. Ricks.
Okay. What I'm wondering why we need to take a position on it. And here's, I am extremely concerned about what has happened to this committee. I saw the thing on what the PAB or whatever that one is that Walker has, Reverend Walker, and the responsibilities that they have, and then what this group now has, and what the council. I don't even see if they consider what we're all about. To me, it's and I don't know how many people have signed up for this committee, new people or whatever, and what they're gonna be doing. Because to me, the way I see it now is it's a waste of our time. I mean, and so to take a position on something that we won't even, I mean, how many people on this committee will be able to even be around when this thing comes up?
If I understand, Mr. Ricks, your objection to us discussing this would be that given that our term is going to expire in a little more than 3 weeks on the 31st of January, we're all going to be replaced because, or most of us will be replaced. We should not take a position, even though part of the responsibility of the Advisory Commission on Policing is to give our opinions to the council on pending legislation. it's your, am I understanding correctly? It's because we as individuals are no longer going to be part of the commission that we shouldn't discuss this?
Right. I mean,
Okay, well, so if I may then, yeah, I mean, you are, of course, free to abstain. I hear you also encouraging us not to go forward. It is, however, our duty, that as members of this commission to consider. We may decide that we're not prepared to take a position. We may be divided on that, but we at the last meeting did propose that we are going to discuss it. So I'd like to move ahead with that. And your objection that we move ahead is noted, and everyone will be aware of that. I recognize Ms. Branson.
Yeah, I think we should take a position. I mean, I've worked a few jobs, and I always tried to work every day. I mean, just because it's the day before my last day doesn't mean I'm not going to work. So,
Good. Let's move to the
that's pretty
substance.
much where I'm at. And let me tell you, I did have an opportunity to review this. And here is what I see in this legislation. And it really is great that we're talking about it today, given the presentations we've had so far. I really see this legislation as being highly premature, primarily because of a number of factors that have been mentioned here today. I looked at the actual bill. I looked at the staff report. And it seems to me that the purpose of this legislation is to develop a protocol on what the response to these sorts of necessities may be, right? Whether there is someone who has a mental health issue, whether or not, what the protocol should be. That's really kind of what this all boils down to, is prescribing a protocol, and the reason that does not make sense to me for this to be a legislative issue is because of there's a state level and there's a federal level, right? I went and looked at the State Center for Excellence, and the State Center of Excellence in this on this issue refers people back to SAMHSA, which is the federal substance abuse and mental health agency. When you open up what SAMHSA says about how these protocols should be developed, the first thing, like in the first 2 pages, it says, well, you should have a response protocol that's based on best practices and the data in your community. That's first thing said. And so what we know for sure, based on everything we've heard tonight, is that we do not have the data that would undergird this kind of protocol. We don't know. And I think I really, just as a fundamental notion, believe that practices that have to do with the protocols that executive branch agencies do probably shouldn't come from a legislative place unless there is a clear reason why. And that's just not, that's not what we got here. And the other, I've talked to a couple folks, and there is concern from people in the community that while this does set up an advisory commission, if you look at what the advisory commission is supposed to do in this bill, the advisory commission is supposed to gather data. Well, that's just about backwards. So, and so, with all due respect, I would suggest that our position on this bill be that, we would not, I think oppose is really strong, but we would not support it because there does not appear to be the necessary data in place to make this make sense.
Thank you.
That's my thinking.
Thank you, Ms. Branson. Well said. Dr. Gaster?
Yeah, I guess I have a question for Captain Satinsky about this. Two questions, really. How restrictive do you think legislating about this is going to be at a time when you're pretty clearly iterating to try and find the best solutions? A lot of this is fairly new, integrating police and non-police resources into dealing with mental health. And I imagine that you are still finding your way. It's not my area of expertise, so that's why I'm posing this as a kind of a question. But do you have concerns that legislating at this point would set too much in stone and make it too difficult for you to make adjustments as you go along?
Dr. Guest, that's a great question. Unfortunately, because of the status we're in with this legislation, I can't answer it in a public forum because I work for the executive branch.
Right.
So whatever decisions to be made are way above my pay grade, sir.
Okay. Well, let me ask you differently. Would you say that we are at the early stages of developing protocols for Montgomery County, and that you are definitely in sort of iteration mode, if you like?
Yeah, I would say we're more at the latter end of it at this point, because we've actually been doing this for a little of just about a year, and we've played, like you said earlier, we played with a few different models. I think to the point made earlier, we actually do have a lot of data in this area, which is great because the way we capture this information. So we're able to make some really good decisions based on this. And a lot of it's going to come down to funding models and how to interact with other government agencies. That's really going to be our biggest hurdles. Our deployment models, we pretty much have set at this point. We have, I can tell you, I have 5 officers right now throughout the county, covering all the districts with the exception of the 1st district, because Rockville City has their own CIT team that pretty much does their own thing. But we'll work with them if they need anything, absolutely. And whatever they need, we will help them with. HHS is working on hiring their therapists, and my hope is that we can add more folks to this. And as we learn, we'll change it. But based on what we have right now, we're pretty much on a good path at this point. It's not solid, but we're almost there, I would say.
Other questions or comments? If I may, Ms. Branson, but before I recognize you, I had a similar response that, and Ms. Branson, I think you described it well as saying that the legislation seems premature. I was struck about the duties to be imposed on the advisory committee, and particularly the extensive annual reporting and evaluation, and that I share your sense that it's not at this point elements that need to be included in the county code. That as Captain Satinsky sort of suggested, they're experimenting, they're developing models, they're developing data on how they're implementing it. And I guess it's a question of what is the problem that this legislation is going to solve. It strikes me it creates in effect a kind of oversight bureaucracy for the collaboration that is being developed between the police departments and the other agencies that are relevant and involved. And so I would share that our approach would be to say we don't support it because we see it premature, rather than saying opposing it. I thought you described that well. I don't know if others have what others would feel about a short letter to that effect. Does anybody else want to be recognized? Ms. Delane, Dr. Ekstrand?
No. No.
Sounds like a good idea.
Mr. Ricks, if there were a letter of that kind, would you abstain or oppose such a letter, or as improper from us, or?
I think I could support that. I mean, I'm just one vote, but I'm just concerned. Again, my major concern is what the responsibility of this committee is now, since it was chopped up by the council.
Well, our responsibilities were reenacted in the bill that the county executive signed this fall, and we are going to be replaced. We're already operating under the new legislation that was adopted. Our name is now the Advisory Commission on Policing. We are functioning as the body that the county council created, and one of our duties is to give them our views on pending legislation.
We don't need. I don't need to spend no more time on that piece.
Ms. Branson, I interrupted you before you were about to speak.
No, well, all I was going to say is at this point, sounds like there's no real objection. So I was going to move that we issue such a letter saying that, we don't support it because it does seem premature, and, stuff like that.
Second that.
And Ms. Delane seconds.
Yes.
Further discussion of the motion? I think we're ready to vote then. All those in favor of the motion to send a letter that we don't support, that we essentially see this as premature, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Let's see. Oh, I see. So all members present are voting. Are there any opposed? There aren't any opposed, and there aren't any abstentions. Well, very good. Friends, that is there, we are at our hour of proposed adjournment. Are there any, if I'll entertain, 30 seconds of additional, Mr. Ricks.
Yes, I'd like to ask our staff about the number of people who have signed up, or what information they have on that process. How's it going?
I'm afraid I can't give you any information. It's confidential at this point, but I will check with our clerk of the council and ask exactly what I can share with you, and I will submit that by an email to you tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Dr. Gaster.
I just want to thank all of the participants today. I'd like to thank my colleagues on this commission, who I think have been exceptionally collegial throughout, and the staff who have been very helpful. The police department has provided a tremendous amount of information, and I think is to be commended for that. And I'd like to thank our chairman for running excellent meetings and to pushing us along in a very positive direction. So thank everybody. This is our last meeting, and you know, I think we've done some good work. So
Yes.
thank you all.
And
Thank you,
and
Dr. Gaspar. Mr. Rick.
I did have another question then. Of the committee, how many of us, or how many of the committee members, or who on the committee will be possibly coming back?
I don't know that any of us have applied to be reappointed.
This is Christina Delane, and if I can be recognized to speak.
Yes, Ms. Delaney, please.
Great, thank you. I do also want to thank everyone on the commission. I've learned a great deal from everyone here. It's a room full of leaders who know how to share the room to be effective. And so I really appreciate being able to be part of this. I have myself applied to be part of the commission. So I hope that my application is successful and I will be able to continue this work.
Great.
Thank you.
Very good news. Ms.
Good.
Gaffney.
Yeah, I also reapplied. So thanks everyone for all the service and time you've put into this committee. And Christina, perhaps we'll continue to working together, or maybe not. We'll see.
We'll see, hopefully so.
But certainly, I think all of us would be happy to be resources for you and your colleagues, or whoever gets named to the Advisory Commission on Policing as they carry forward. And just to say that, you know, I have, you know, been deeply gratified to work with you. I think the 8 of us have really worked well together in these months, and I would say after 3.5 years, I have a much heightened appreciation and respect for the Montgomery County Police Department. I think that the more I have learned, the more I've interacted with you. I would say, you know, Sergeant Brewer hasn't spoken tonight, but her many evenings spent with us were so admirable and so constructive and helpful. And you know, I had gotten a call from a student who in Chicago who was interested in a career in policing, and I'd said, I encourage you to contact Sergeant Brewer in, there's a female student. I urge you to contact Sergeant Brewer in Montgomery County, Maryland. There would be an outstanding model for a young policewoman in the United States. Thank you. Dr. Ekstrand.
I just also want to say what a good experience and positive experience it's been to be a part of this group. It's the level of expertise and talent and commitment are just amazing. So I thank you very much for having me as part of the group.
Our pleasure. And Mr. Ricks.
Yeah, I think that it's a shame that we were getting to the point where this committee had gelled into what I thought it should have been. Having been elected or appointed in the beginning as the first chair for one meeting to get us started, Eric, I think that you have done a yeoman's job in carrying us through because it looks like everybody who came before that, except for Cherie, who attempted to take us on, it just they were not committed to the process and not committed to this committee and dedicated as you have been. So I guess that's part of my disappointment in the fact that they shutting down this committee. And I think that the staff, like Susan, has just been tremendous in sticking with us and working with us. And, you know, her patience in trying to keep things going. Sometimes I mean, a lot of times we don't disagree with everything or each other, but this group has been a knowledgeable group and one who has been, to me, committed to being here 99% of the time. And so, you know, I've let some of the council people know my feelings about it. And the fact that they were premature in my thing with this committee and then the legislature put together the PAB or whatever, and they paying them $10,000, whatever they paying them to come to meetings, and they couldn't even give us, we didn't even have the opportunity to be together to get a bottle of water. Because during the pandemic, we couldn't get together. We went to school by virtual. And so, you know, to me, they did not give this committee the applause and that they should have had. So, but thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for what you've done.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
for
Riggs.
being a part.
Susan, thank Susan and Logan, you know, we
Yes.
of course have relied upon you, and we are deeply, deeply, all of us grateful for the evenings you spent, and of course all the other work, you know, sending us bulletins, you know, carrying so much administrative load.
And we're supposed to meet only once a quarter, right? But we
Well,
met
a
every month.
minimum of 6 times a year.
Yeah. Well, we
So,
met 12 and 13 times a year. So.
Is there a Ms. Branson? Ms. Branson.
Yeah, I just want to, you know, as the old saying goes, everything has been said, but not everybody has said it. So, I also want to thank you all. This has been great. I have reapplied. I doubt if, you know, I'll be selected, but anyway, I really have enjoyed, you know, working with you all. And I hope that everyone who has been so involved continues to keep an eye on this issue, because it is not resolved. And so whether you know, watch it from near or far, you know, please, you know, I was a part of creating the legislation that brought this into being. I mean, and so this has been as was, I think, Robin and Eric. I mean, so this has been the achievement of some good things. I think we've done really good things, and I think we did set a standard for what a civilian review should look like, policy reviews should look like. So I you know, I'm deeply grateful for everyone who has been a part of this, and, you know, hope to see you all again in another board or commission.
Thank you, Ms. Branson. Is there a motion?
I'll have a motion to adjourn.
It has
I
been moved.
second it.
It's been second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.